Welcome to today's episode of Serial Killer Files by Skoob, and I am your host, Arthur Morgan. I need to warn you up front. This is one of the most disturbing cases in Canadian criminal history, involving the torture and murder of teenage girls. If you're not in the right headspace for heavy content, maybe save this one for another time. Picture this. Ontario, Canada. Early 1990s. Two beautiful newlyweds who looked like they'd stepped straight out of a magazine. Blonde, tanned, photogenic, the kind of couple that made people turn their heads. They'd dress in matching outfits, all smiles and sunshine. Their wedding in the summer of 1991 was picture perfect, taking place in the charming village of Niagara-on-the-Lake. But here's the thing about perfect facades. They're often hiding something absolutely monstrous. Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka would become known as the Ken and Barbie Killers, a nickname that somehow captured both their disturbing attractiveness and the grotesque nature of their crimes. And what makes this case particularly haunting is what they left behind. Videotapes. Detailed, horrific recordings of their crimes that would become some of the most disturbing evidence ever entered into a Canadian courtroom. Between 1991 and 1992, terror gripped southern Ontario. Two teenage girls vanished from their safe, small-town communities. These weren't random disappearances in dangerous neighborhoods. These were good girls, walking home from school, living their normal lives. When the first victim was discovered, the horror was almost incomprehensible. Her body had been dismembered and encased in concrete blocks, dumped in the shallows of a fishing pond. The second victim was found naked in a roadside ditch, her body washed clean, her hair cut off. Police suspected the killer was taking trophies. Billboards went up across the region showing a mysterious brown Camaro connected to one of the disappearances. Parents locked down their daughters. The entire area between Toronto and Niagara Falls lived in fear, knowing a serial killer was hunting in their midst. And then came the arrests. The shock wasn't just that they caught the killers, it was who they caught. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to Paul Bernardo's childhood. Behind his handsome face and charming smile was a young man sculpted by absolute dysfunction. His home life was a nightmare. His parents were affluent, nice cars, big house, but emotionally bankrupt. His mother's idea of a family meal was opening a can of macaroni. Childhood friends weren't allowed in the house. Ken, the man Paul thought was his father, would swing between ignoring him and screaming at him, hitting all three children for the slightest infractions. Then came the revelation that destroyed whatever stability Paul had. His mother, in a fit of rage, told him Ken wasn't his biological father. She'd had an affair. The man Paul had looked up to, despite everything, admired for his dress sense and accounting success, wasn't even his real dad. And to make matters worse, Ken would later be convicted of being a peeping Tom and sexually abusing a minor. This toxic environment bred hatred. Ken made derogatory remarks about women constantly, and Paul absorbed it all. By his late teens, Paul was openly talking about wanting to rape girls. He fantasized about creating a virgin farm where young girls would do whatever he desired. This wasn't just talk. In 1986, he started making obscene phone calls to a friend's ex-girlfriend. Police traced them, and a restraining order was placed on him. But Paul was just getting started. Several months before meeting Karla, Paul Bernardo committed his first rape against a girlfriend, and he didn't stop there. He became the Scarborough Rapist, a predator who prowled the darkened streets of Toronto's Scarborough district, attacking women walking home alone. The assaults were brutal and degrading. In one Christmas-time attack in 1987, he ran his knife along a victim's back, grabbed her by the hair, and pounded her head against the ground. He forced her to perform oral sex, to say she loved it, to wish his penis a Merry Christmas. The assault lasted an hour. Medical examination revealed a torn hymen, tears in her anus, and multiple abrasions. Throughout 1988, he continued these periodic attacks, committing at least 8 rapes. Metro Toronto police were stumped and sent the case to the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit. Agent Greg McCrary correctly profiled the rapist as being in his early 20s and living at home with his parents. McCrary also predicted something chilling. The violence would inevitably lead to murder. He was right. But here's the tragedy. It could have been prevented. October 1987. A hotel in Ontario. 17-year-old Karla Homolka was at a convention, staying overnight, a rare taste of freedom for a high school girl. In the hotel coffee bar, she met 23-year-old Paul Bernardo and his friend. Paul and his buddy made a habit of cruising around picking up girls, and the charming Paul had far more conquests than the average guy. Karla looked younger than her 17 years, and Paul had a thing for very young teenagers. It was a match made in hell. They talked, laughed, and eventually went up to the girl's room. Someone turned off the lights, and within moments, Karla and Paul were having sex on top of her bed. The other couple lay there in embarrassed silence, listening to over 3 hours of enthusiastic coupling before everyone fell asleep. Karla was smitten. She told friends she'd fallen in love with him the moment she set eyes on him. They made a striking couple, both blonde and tanned, sometimes dressed in identical T-shirts. She was tiny and classically feminine. He was broad-shouldered and tall. Paul wooed her with flowers and cuddly toys. He ingratiated himself with her family so successfully that they started calling him the son they never had. Living almost 2 hours away, Paul was soon staying over at the Homolka house every weekend, officially on the settee, but sneaking into Karla's room after dark. What started as romance quickly morphed into something darker. Shortly after Christmas 1987, Paul's treatment of Karla began to change. Gradually, subtly, he began controlling every aspect of her life. He told her what to wear, how to style her hair, where she could and couldn't go. He convinced her to drop her friends because they were immature and stupid. He encouraged her to drink more and more alcohol. The sexual demands escalated. By late spring 1988, he was insisting on acts Karla initially resisted: fellatio, then anal sex. But she obliged. To please him, she wore a dog collar during sex. She'd repeat scripted phrases at his direction. "My name is Karla. I am 17 years old. I am your little cocksucker. I am your little cunt. I am your little slut." Karla had worn handcuffs on her jacket as a fashion statement before meeting Paul. Now he actually used them on her. He asked her to buy a dog chain, which he'd tighten around her neck during sex. This is textbook behavior of a sexually sadistic offender. The scripting, the progressive reduction of the partner into an obedient object, the escalating violence. And as Paul reduced Karla into a compliant sex chattel, his attacks as the Scarborough Rapist intensified. In May 1990, police published a composite sketch of the Scarborough Rapist. A female acquaintance saw it and tipped Metro Police that Paul Bernardo looked remarkably similar to the drawing. In November 1990, police interviewed Bernardo. He voluntarily provided samples of saliva, blood, and hair for DNA fingerprinting. Here's where the system failed catastrophically. Those samples weren't tested until February 1993, over 2 years later. The DNA lab had only been set up in summer 1990 and was heavily backlogged with no priority system in place. An official review later determined that had the specimens been tested within 90 days, as they should have been, it is clear these rapes and murders could have been prevented. Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French might still be alive today. Instead, Paul was free to kill. By winter 1990, Paul and Karla were engaged, planning a June 1991 wedding, But Paul had become obsessed with someone unexpected: Karla's 15-year-old sister, Tammy. Paul's fixation was disturbing. He'd sneak into Tammy's room at night while she slept and masturbate on her pillow. He demanded Karla dress in Tammy's clothes during sex. He created a new script for her. "I'm your 15-year-old virgin. I love you. You're the king." While Karla performed oral sex, Paul would stare at photographs of Tammy. He insisted they have sex in Tammy's bedroom while she was out. Incredibly, none of this offended Karla. She went along with it all. Paul bought a video camcorder, ostensibly for the wedding. He began obsessively recording everything. Then one day, Paul and Tammy drove to the U.S. to buy liquor without Karla. On the way back, they stopped and made out. When Karla found out, she lashed out. "She's a virgin. She wouldn't know what to do with Snuffles," their nickname for Paul's penis. But Paul saw an opening in her anger. "Maybe I should have sex with Tam and teach her the proper way. Wouldn't it be great if I took her virginity?" At first, Karla refused. But just like with anal sex, her refusal strained their relationship. She was terrified the wedding wouldn't happen despite the $4,500 engagement ring Paul had given her. Finally, she caved. She agreed to give her little sister's virginity to Paul as a Christmas wedding present, compensation for not being a virgin herself when they met. Karla stole halothane, an anesthetic, from the veterinary clinic where she worked. She also obtained halcyon, a powerful sedative, claiming she was ordering it for the animal clinic. Christmas Eve, 1990. Paul arrived at the Homolka house with his video camera. Later, television audiences would be horrified watching home videos of 15-year-old Tammy drinking eggnog spiked with halcyon while Bernardo and Karla hovered over her, encouraging her to drink up. She had less than a few hours to live. When the parents went to bed, they told Tammy to turn in too. But Tammy protested. Karla and Paul had invited her to stay up and watch a movie with them. The parents relented and went upstairs. Paul and Karla put on Lisa, a film about a teenage girl's infatuation with a stranger who, unknown to her, is a serial killer. Grimly appropriate. By the time the movie ended, Tammy had passed out from the halcyon. Karla ran to get the halothane, pouring it onto a cloth and holding it over Tammy's face to ensure deep sedation. Then they raped her. Paul brutally assaulted her while Karla held the halothane-soaked rag. Paul also ordered Karla to perform sex acts on her own unconscious sister. They recorded everything. Then disaster struck, but not the kind that stopped them. Tammy woke up and started vomiting, choking on her own vomit. They tried clearing her airways, but failed. 15-year-old Tammy Homolka choked to death. Quickly, they cleaned her up, dressed her, and called 911. Nothing aroused suspicion. Tammy's death was ruled accidental. And Karla? She was later angered by her sister's death, not out of guilt, but because her parents couldn't get over it and were being all Debbie Downer on her cheery wedding plans. Did Tammy's death chasten them? Not even slightly. Less than a month later, Paul picked up a teenage girl, drove her to the empty Homolka house, and raped her in Karla's bedroom. He then simply drove her away and dropped her off. The terrorized girl never reported it. Next came another twisted gift from Karla. She invited a 15-year-old girl to dinner at the house she and Paul had rented in St. Catherine. They knocked her out with drinks and halothane. Paul raped her while Karla videotaped. The girl was released, but the crimes were building toward the inevitable. June 14, 1991. During one of his smuggling trips across the U.S. border, Paul spotted 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey standing outside a house alone. She'd been locked out. Paul lured her into his car and kidnapped her, taking her to the house he shared with Karla in St. Catherine. For an entire day, both Paul and Karla raped, sexually abused, and beat the girl. The camcorder ran the whole time. The next day, June 15th, they realized releasing Leslie would put them at risk. Paul, who had the heart and soul of a serial murderer, likely had this planned all along. He strangled her with an electric cord. Then came the gruesome disposal. They used a chainsaw to dismember her body. They encased the pieces in concrete, quick-mix concrete blocks, and threw them into Lake Gibson near the Homolka family residence. Canoeists discovered the grisly remains on Saturday, June 29, 1991. That same day, just a few miles away, Paul and Karla were getting married in their picture-perfect ceremony in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Thursday afternoon, April 16, 1992, Easter weekend. 15-year-old Kristen French was in a church school parking lot when Paul and Karla kidnapped her, overpowering her and forcing her into their car. They drove her to 57 Bayview Drive in Port Dalhousie. What followed was a 3-day videotaped rape and torture session so brutal that even hardened police officers later had trouble viewing it. Paul strangled Kristen on April 16th, Easter Sunday. Her body was found naked in a roadside ditch, washed clean, her hair cut off as a trophy. February 1st, 1993. Finally, after over 2 years, the DNA results came back. Paul Bernardo was the Scarborough Rapist. On February 17, 1993, Paul was arrested and interrogated for 8 hours. 2 days later, police raided the house with a search warrant. They didn't find much incriminating evidence during that initial search, but they found something better, a willing witness in Karla. The previous December, in a fit of rage, Paul had beaten Karla to a pulp. Terrified for her life, she'd filed a police complaint. Now, with Paul arrested for the Scarborough rapes, Karla saw her opportunity. Through her lawyer, she offered to tell police exactly what had happened. Here's where this case becomes truly controversial, a miscarriage of justice that still enrages people today. Before police obtained the videotapes, Karla Homolka made a deal. She portrayed herself as a battered wife, a victim of Paul's violence and control. In exchange for testifying against her husband, she received a substantially reduced sentence of just 12 years. The deal was made. The deal was locked in. Then Paul Bernardo's attorney, Ken Murray, on his client's instructions, retrieved the videotapes from their hiding place and concealed them for 17 months. When the tapes were finally turned over to police, they revealed the horrifying truth. Karla hadn't been a passive victim. She had gleefully participated in the rapes and torture. She had been an active, willing accomplice in unspeakable horrors. But it was too late. The plea bargain couldn't be changed. Paul Bernardo was convicted of the murders and rapes. He received life in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years. He remains locked up today. Karla Homolka served her 12 years and was released in 2005. She's been free for nearly 2 decades now. She remarried, to the brother of her attorney, no less. She gave birth to 3 children. She spent years living a leisurely life in the sunshine of the French Caribbean island of Guadeloupe, raising her little darlings. In 2014, she and her family returned to Canada. The woman who helped rape and murder teenage girls, including her own sister, is out there somewhere, living freely. The case of the Ken and Barbie Killers represents one of the darkest chapters in Canadian criminal history. The videotapes they created remain some of the most disturbing evidence ever presented in court. Detailed recordings that showed exactly what organized, sadistic serial killers do to their victims. The case raises haunting questions about justice, about how 2 beautiful people could harbor such darkness, about how one person's DNA sitting untested in a lab for 2 years cost 2 young girls their lives. And perhaps most disturbing of all, it forces us to confront the reality that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like the perfect couple next door. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves out there.